Well, first of all, thanks for having me back on, and we're excited about it too. We filmed a half-hour interview on the Sid Ross show, and we did 4 shows on prophecy and the news in the last 2 weeks. I guess Sid Ross show will air sometime late June. I think prophecy and the news will air before that. The book is also featured on Sid Ross monthly news magazine, right on the front cover. The whole cover is basically the book cover, which is pretty amazing. It's getting a lot of legs. It's still not released yet, where we still don't have books. The truck that was going to bring it to us, our copies, had a broken axle yesterday. So now we're looking at Friday before we actually get books. Bob Ulrich, of Prophecy of the News, his 1,500, that's his first order that he placed. He's got the tracking number. The books are lost. Unbelievable. Yeah, so it's, is that demonic or is that just coincidence? Well, don't know yet. I just find it sort of interesting. The book is groundbreaking, I believe, because it really, and other people, have delved into this. Certainly Fritz Zimmerman, who comes on the record, Era Junkins, who's also in the book, and others. I mean, I think of Steve Quayle, who's been talking about giants forever. I know Steve's got a new book coming out. I have not seen it. I have no idea what it's about. We may be plowing in the same field. Hopefully we'll cover different information. Part 1 of the book establishes that there were giants in America. That's part 1. And it relies heavily on eyewitnesses. It also has an interview with a man by the name of Robert Mirabal, a past Pueblo Native American, who talks about giants, that his tribe would go into the hills and bring offerings to these giants. And it echoes very, very much what Genesis 6 account is, where the sky god saw the daughters of men and, went down and had sex with them, and giants were born. It echoes Genesis. And this, when I asked him, where'd you get this from? Well, I got it from my grandfather. So it's all oral tradition. And what we talk about in the book, or I talk about in the book, is the fact that many anthropologists, until recently, have always discounted the oral tradition of Native Americans, First Nations people. And I think it's imperative that we examine these oral traditions. I just returned from New Mexico, where I spoke with a Navajo woman who, again, had a giant legend passed down from her grandmother. This will be in Volume 2, once again to substantiate the fact that there were giant beings in the Americas and it does not fit the Darwinian paradigm. And in part 1, we go into the fact that the Smithsonian, who were ardent Darwinists, who were and are ardent Darwinists, I believe there's a deliberate obfuscation by this organization to repress anything at all that would come against the Darwinian theory.
Amen.
And so part 2 deals with us going to Peru, where we uncover artifacts and skulls, which once again fly in the face of a Darwinian paradigm, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. As a matter of fact, what's really fascinating is for those out there who, have taken, to studying the information that's presented, even on the Ancient Aliens episodes, it kind of breaks my heart when I see Christians trying to, debunk what they're saying, because if you study some of the, forbidden archaeology writings, you study, the data that they present. It's not that the data that they're presenting is fabricated. The data that they're presenting is the data. I mean, it's there. They're showing you the 150-ton stones at Pumapunku. They're showing you that they're cut with laser precision. Okay, you can't dispute that's there. You can't. It's very difficult to argue away the carbon dating of stones that and such, or debris and such that can indicate petroglyphs that are potentially tens of thousands of years old. So what we have to do as Christians, I believe, is what you're doing, is to look at the facts and the figures from the archaeology and map it back to the Bible and have it tell the proper story the way it ought to.
Well, and look, the other thing, you've thrown out some numbers here. First of all, there's no block of stone that weighs 150 tons that I'm aware of. Well, that's not true. That's not true.
In Puma Punku, there is in
Puma
Puma
Punku and Baalbek is like 1,400. So, okay. So I thought Puma Punku wasn't that heavy, but you may be right. We looked at stones in Sacsayhuaman that were 120 tons that were quarried from 40 to 60 miles away and then brought up to the elevation 12,000 feet. So the quarry's down 2,000 feet lower, and the Inca did not have the wheel. And when you look at these stones, it's all in the book. And by the way, the book is 8.5 by 11, full color, 4-page, glossy print. We spent a lot of money on the book. What we wanted to do is give the reader the feel of what we saw. And I wasn't going to put, and I could have done this like a lot of other authors do. You know, they don't go 4-color, they'll go black and white, and then in the middle there's a little, 20 photographs stuck in the middle. And so you're constantly turning back and forth between what you're reading and what you're supposed to be looking at. I can't stand doing that, and I refused to do it for our book. And I didn't want to make it a small book like 6 by 9 or 5 by 8.5 and 11 normal size print. So we went oversized print, 8.5 by 11, and it's huge. And so the photographs appear where they're supposed to appear. So as you're turning through the book and reading the book, there are the full color, 4-color photographs, high glossy paper, staring at you. And so the reproduction is just amazing. And we did that deliberately and purposely because we felt like this was too important of a book to go cheesy on it to try to save a few dollars. I'd rather, it's pricey. It's $30, but it's one of a kind book. There's nothing else like it. And when we show what's down in Peru, and we tie the dots together from a Christian biblical perspective, the idea that the Nephilim tribes were not all wiped out. And we know this from the Bible. I mean, who do you think Goliath is years later? And they fled the area. We know that we believe, the theory is that the Nephilim tribes, 3,500 years ago during the conquest of the Promised Land, or what archaeological circles and academia will call the Levant, left the area. Some went northward, and we believe settled in Ohio Valley and other places and fanned out through all the Americas. Others fled across the Atlantic. How do I know this? Because Thor Heyerdahl proved that you could take an Egyptian papyrus boat and sail across the Atlantic. I mean, he proved it with Kon-Tiki and his second book, Ra. So, I mean, it's like many of the archaeologists, with all due respect, and the Darwinians are always saying that there's no contact or contact between cultures. And this is called isolationism, where one group is in isolation until contact happens maybe hundreds of years later. Well, the diffusionist theory believes that, no, that's not what's happening. People are curious. People are constantly exploring. Now, if you go and you tell people in this country that the Vikings were in America, you get laughed at. You get scorned at. Oh, everyone. But we have evidence. We've got evidence of what I believe is actual Phoenician handwriting, carved into the stones. And here's one of the more fascinating interviews I did for the book was by a man by the name of Kelsey Stone and his dad. Kelsey's like a 22-year-old college student, and it was just amazing. I saw this on America on Earth, and I immediately got in contact with him because it was bolstering my theory completely about the Nephilim. And I interviewed him, and here's the backstory. The Stone family, the grandfather, brought a site which has now come to be known as America's Stonehenge. And it's in New Hampshire, and he purchased the land to preserve what he believed was an ancient megalithic site. Megalithic means large building stones, okay? What he believed was an ancient megalithic site. So now, fast forward, the grandfather's passed on. The father's now the head curator, but the grandson, Kelsey, is nosing around on Google Earth. First of all, this site in New Hampshire is known as America's Stonehenge, and it's a henge. A henge is a circular area, usually with a waterway on the interior. Not always, but that's one of the marks of a henge. Like the Great Circle Mound is a henge in Ohio. Now, we also talk about that. Fritz Zimmerman weighs in on that in our book, and on the Trail of the Nephilim. So Kelsey Stone's nosing around on Google Earth, and he's examining his henge, the one where he is. Now, from the center of the henge are standing stones, and these standing stones go out a distance from the henge. And the standing stones correspond with the summer and winter solstices, the longest and shortest day of the year. Summer is the longest day of the year. Winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. And then opposite of that, if you're on the circle, right, like 45 degrees, what would it be, 90 degrees. 90 degrees from those areas, so you have a cross, are the equinoxes, the spring and fall equinoxes, where the daytime and the nighttime are equal amounts of day and night, the equinoxes. And there are other standing stones in the circle. So Kelsey's just messing around, and he decides to extend a line from the center of the henge in New Hampshire out to the summer solstice standing stone to see where it's going. This is all in the book. He gave me his research, full color photos, or actually they're JPEGs taken off of Google Earth. It shows a line which extends through New Hampshire into Massachusetts and out into the Atlantic. And he continues that line and continues it and continues it. Eventually, thousands of miles later, it winds up intersecting the Trilithon, which is three rocks, like two standing up and one on the side, like a doorway, but all made with great megalithic stone. It ends up intersecting precisely the center Trilithon in Stonehenge, England. You cannot do that 4,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. It's impossible. You cannot do it with that type of accuracy. I ran this by a surveyor. There is absolutely no way he is aware of in antiquity to create this type of precision. You can do it in modernity, in the modern era, because you've got satellites overhead. But in antiquity, you can't. Thousands of years ago, you can't. Unless there's someone in operation here. You have two choices. It's either ET in operation or it's the fallen one. And, of course, you know where I'm going to land on every time. This is the work of angelic beings, fallen angelic beings, specifically the fallen one. But wait, guys, it gets even better. Kelsey wasn't satisfied with just extending the line to Stonehenge. He then wondered, well, what happens if I continue to extend the line? So he extends it and extends it and extends it further, and he winds up in Beirut, Lebanon. So you say, what's so different? Who cares about Beirut? Beirut, Lebanon is the home of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a great seafaring people. The Phoenicians are the descendants from the Canaanites, who were a Nephilim tribe. That's all on it's all in the book, On the Trail of the Nephilim. Absolutely mind-boggling. Now, see, he extended the line to the Phoenicians, but he stopped there. To him, it didn't, well, okay, the Phoenicians, far out. He didn't go far enough, with all due respect, because he's not operating from a biblical paradigm. But I went Beirut, Lebanon. Who were these people? And when you do a search, you find out that they were direct descendants from a Nephilim tribe that was pushed out of Canaan. And that date, again, coincides with the conquest of Canaan about 3,500 years ago when Joshua and Caleb come into the Promised Land. All that is in the book, On the Trail of the Nephilim. And that's just one of the mind-blowing aspects of the book. I mean, it's just, when you get into this stuff, especially when you get into Peru, it is just absolutely mind-boggling.
What is the Peru connection? Without giving away the secret, I mean, how does that all fit together? I mean, you know, from the, can you kind of like, I don't know, like put together the whole land of Canaan, Phoenicians, great seafaring, you know, then it spreads. I mean, how does that all connect together?
Well, it connects together because we know that all the giants were not killed. Many of them fled. We also know that perhaps not all the tribes had giant characteristics. Some of them did, but there are about 20 different Nephilim tribes in the area, and all these tribes have different characteristics. Some of them are reflected in their names. For instance, the long necks, the Rephaim, Nephilim, Anakim, Zamzumim, the Emims. All these tribes are listed in the book. Well, Joshua and Caleb are pressing in with a mandate, and I talk about this also in great depth. This is the key look, if you're a first-year biology student, or if you're a first-year student in any university, and you announce you're a Christian, and you've got a mean professor up there who's determined just to make you look like an idiot, the question that they use to throw Christians off, they'll say something like this: well, you're a Christian. Yes, sir, I am. Do you believe the God of the Bible is a good God? Yes, sir, I do. Do you believe the God of the Old Testament is a good God? Yes, sir, I do. Well, then how can a good God in the Old Testament wipe out every man, woman, and children in the Promised Land? How can a good God do that? And see, unless a student understands the Nephilim, they sit there with a blank expression on their face because they've never been taught any of this, and they look like absolute morons in front of the university professor. But there's an answer to it, and the answer is this. If he had known his stuff, if he'd been taught this stuff, and by the way, I'm teaching this at every single, if I can, every radio show I'm on, and also every lecture. If he knows about the Nephilim, he then can turn to the professor and go, well, sir, the reason for the mandate is there's a hybrid race living in the Levant. As Numbers 13:33 so eloquently portrays, the Nephilim are there. And this, sir, is the second incursion of the fallen angels having sex with the women and creating a hybrid known as the Nephilim. It's a seed war. This, sir, is the reason for Noah's flood thousands of years ago. When the Nephilim were on the earth, this was stated very succinctly in Genesis 6. You see, if I were there in the room, the guy wouldn't stand a chance. And this is what our kids need to understand, because this, and I've heard this over and over and over again from students, this one question is what throws them off and it derails their faith, and they've never been told. And even when you go online and we see Christian pastors trying to deal with this, they just, well, you know, the sin must have been, no. You don't understand the passage, folks, because you don't understand Genesis 6. Unless we come to grips that fallen angels had sex with the women of earth, which is what all the early church fathers believed, all the early rabbis believed, the book of Enoch, which was part of the canon at one time, and then kicked out in the 4th century and basically burned everywhere, but found yet in the Dead Sea Scrolls, quoted 70 times in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, referred to in Jude, 2nd, and Peter, and Paul alludes to it. Unless we understand, we don't understand what's going on in modernity, in the modern time. Jesus warns us. As in the days of Noah, so it will be when I return. I'm paraphrasing. He's pointing back to a time in history unlike any other time on this planet. And it's when the fallen angels were having sex with the women on earth. Unless we understand that as a church, as a body of believers, and come to grips with it, we have no clue as to what is going on in the present day, because we are in the days of Noah, and the same type of breeding program that happened in the days of Noah are happening once again in real time as I speak. You have no idea of the emails I get from people who have little visitors at night. Or we counseled a man over the weekend. His 16-year-old son had a black-eyed kid manifestation. Absolutely terrified him. I prayed with him this morning. He gave his life to the Lord this morning. This is what we do here behind the scenes. He gave his life to the Lord this morning. And I armed him, and I sent him an email. I said, you need to read the Gospel of John. Then go to Ephesians 6. Learn what kind of war you're in. Put on the full armor of God. Then go to the book of Job and understand that this is what the fallen one is up to. And that's what goes on here behind the scenes. This stuff is real. The church dithers. The church sleeps. The church, for the most part, plays church and has no clue as to what is happening and manifesting all around them.
Amen. Kenneth?
Hey, L.A., I'm looking at some old newspaper articles from the late 1800s, and I live in the Pittsburgh area, and right around the Pittsburgh area here, north of us and just here near Greensburg, they're unearthing skeletons like crazy. These things are big, 12-foot tall, heads the size. I mean, they're documented. The Carnegie Museum, 25 miles away, 30 miles away from where I live.
Will you do me a favor, Kenneth?
Sure.
Kenneth, try to go there and put an inquiry. My wife's family lives in Youngwood, so we were actually just there for like 24 hours visiting. There was a conference that we did in Pennsylvania, which was really fun. Shout out to Steve Leidig and the crew at the Tri-State Ministry Center there. It was well attended. It was a great conference. But you see, these newspaper articles, we know they have the bones, and you can't see them. They're not there. Guaranteed, if you go and you try to put a request to see them, they'll say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Show them the article. I mean, if you would do that, I will gladly pay you for gas and your time. I will. You can be my man in the field if you would.
I'll see what we could do, L.A. I mean, they list the curator from the Carnegie at the time. They identify the location. I know exactly where this one farm is. And then north of us here.
Listen, I will fly out there in my next airplane if you can find anything, because this is what we need to do. We know that they've got them. We know that because we've got. If it was one or two newspaper articles, okay, but you know what? When I talk to a tenured archaeologist about this at a major university, a professor of archaeology at a major university, and I asked the person, I said, what about the men of letters 100 years ago or more that talked about 9, 10, 11, 12 footers coming out of the ground all up and down the Americas? You know what her answer was? Men of letters then didn't know how to measure.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about fanaticism? You want to talk about, blind leading the blind? You want to talk about, they're always talking about how we're Christians are so dogmatic and right-wing fundamental. Excuse me, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard of in my life. In my life. A medical doctor cannot measure a disarticulated skeleton in the 20s? That's insulting. You're insulting my intelligence, and you're insulting our ancestors in the medical profession less than 100 years ago. It's absolutely an unconscionable statement. Just unbelievable. And yet they have to hold to that paradigm at all costs, and they deny, obfuscate, ridicule. Look, when this book gets released, and so far it has not been released, no one has a copy of it. We're still waiting for our copies. Bob Ulrich waiting for his. Sid Roth got his, apparently. He ordered 5,000 of them. So when this thing goes out, I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack. And all I'm going to do is keep pointing back to the evidence. You can lie and you can spit. You can do whatever you want. I really don't care. Where are the bones, pal? Just tell me that. Where are the bones? And if you don't know where the bones are, or you tell us, well, they got lost, then all you're doing is bolstering. And the fact is, look, I'll just give you an example of what I'm up against. There's a guy out here, okay, that was out here in Catalina in the 20s, all right? This guy unearthed 9, 10, 11 footers out on Catalina Island. And he was sort of an amateur archaeologist, and he's got a bad reputation because he desecrated a lot of the skeletons. This is before, that's just what they did. There's a lot of Native American skeletons, and he would just nail them up on the wall in a museum, He would take different femur bones and nail them up. Well, recently, a year ago, there was discovered a journal. He actually kept a journal, this guy. His name is Ralph Glidden. He kept a journal of all of his entries and who he sold the bones to. So I have been trying to look at this journal since January when I first learned of it. And you would think I was trying to exhume JFK by the amount of red tape and nonsense. Well, you can't come until this and that, and we need the paperwork. We need a letter. All I want to do is look at the journal. You know why? Because I know in that journal there are records. And in those records are where this man sold perhaps some of the giant bones. And if I'm lucky, the family, the ancestors now, or I should say the heirs, may have those bones. All we need is one femur. All we need is one 40-inch femur, and all bets are off. And that's the type of nonsense you go through. So we went down to UCLA. We got into the back room where no one gets to go with 2 archaeologists and a representative of a Native American tribe out here called the Chumash that were there to make sure that we showed respect to the bones, and we did. And, what they showed us was part of the Glidden collection. Well, the Glidden collection has been dispersed for decades, and some of it's in England and some of it's in France and some of it's here. And, in my opinion, anything that could be construed as something that would go up against the Darwinian paradigm has long since been removed. What we saw were Native American skulls and remains. That's what we saw. Nothing anomalous in any way, shape, or form. But see, I already know all this, and that's why we went down to Peru. When we went to Peru, what we saw there was absolutely mind-boggling. And get this, you could, about 3 or 4 years ago, you could go to a museum in Lima, the capital of Peru, and you could see what was known at that time as the golden mummies. And this was one of the first things I wanted to view, one of the first remains I wanted to view, the golden mummies. So we get there to the guide. In fact, I dedicated the book to Brian Forrester. He was our guide, and just an incredible man with an indefatigable thirst for the truth. And Brian looked at me and said, L.A., they took those down just a short while ago. So then, but we'll go to this other museum, and we will see, I was there 4 months ago, and we will see an entire room of elongated skulls that were found all through Peru. So I said, great. So off we went. We went to this museum, and we arrived there, and guess what? That part of the museum, the room which showed all the Paracas skulls, all the elongated skulls, was no longer there. It's all boarded up, fresh drywall over the door openings, under construction. Well, what happened to the skulls? Well, they're back in our, can we see them? Oh, no, you can't see them. And this is what's happening even in Peru. And in Peru, the Darwinian paradigm is alive and well. They've got the ridiculous, the chimpanzee walking upright, somehow turning into modern man. And if you want to believe that, I got a nice bridge I want to sell you in New York City. There's never been one transitory fossil, despite what these guys say with like Lucy and Piltdown. Remember, Piltdown Man was hoisted up the flagpole. Oh, look, this is proof that the ape man existed. Blah 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 blah. And then 50 years later, you still can't really look at the thing, but some guy actually looks at it and goes, "This is a pig's tooth. This whole thing's a hoax." Or Archaeopteryx is a perfect example. Oh, you can't look at the original, which shows the bird with the dinosaur wings. Well, they later discovered that all that was added afterward. I mean, the hoaxes are just everywhere. It's embarrassing, and it's just like global warming. Well, we have to fudge the evidence because we got to prove that global warming is really there. I talk about this stuff in the book. I use Piltdown Man as one perfect example of how, quote unquote, science skews the evidence because they want to create a paradigm. And then I take it to just a few years ago with the whole global warming nonsense that they were going to, we got to carbon tax everybody. And at the last minute, the emails were raided, and it came out that the scientists, the high priest of modernity, are fudging the facts. Thank you very much. So why should we believe anything these guys have to say? We don't know. And the fact is this. They have deliberately obfuscated these artifacts. However, there are private museums in Peru, and that's where we went. And what we saw there, we actually have a cast of one of the skulls. We took, he's a fossil caster. His name is Joe Taylor. He did an extraordinary job on the skull. We believe it was a female. It's not a giant skull, but we believe it's a Nephilim, and it's not cradle boarded. When I took the skull down to UCLA and showed it to this gentleman, the first words I was, "Oh, that's cradle boarding." I said, "Sir, may I ask you to look again?" And as he looked at it, then his eyes kind of bulged, and he went, "Where'd you get this?" Just like that. And then I told him the story.
What's cradle boarding?
Well, cradle boarding, let me explain what that is. In ancient cultures, they would take a child, an infant, and they would place a board on the back of a child's head, and also like a textile, a very firm textile in the front, and they would bind the head this way. And as the child grew, it would create a distorted shape, an elongated shape. But it's very clear where you see that on a child. It's flat in the front and flat in the back. You get that. That's cradle headboarding. That happened globally. But it begs the question, why is this culture emulating this to begin with? I mean, why get up on a Monday morning and go, "Oh, we just had a kid. I think we should make him a cone head. What do you think, honey?" I mean, that's crazy. Right?
No,
I mean, that's
it's
nuts.
worship. It's worship.
Exactly. They are worshiping what they knew were gods to them. And the Nephilim, these unholy hybrids, had demonic power, and they were enhanced creatures. And so that's what they're emulating. Well, the skull we have, first of all, and I've shown the skull everywhere. I showed it on Sid Roth. I showed it on Prophecy of Manus. And, people are going to go, "Well, I've got no DNA testing. How do you know it's an Nephilim skull?" Just everybody take a deep breath, first of all, okay? Just take a deep breath. I'm not saying it's a Nephilim skull. What I am saying is that right now it fits the paradigm, and we believe it's a Nephilim skull. We've done some testing on it, which shows some very, very interesting anomalies. We are going to get DNA testing. But here's the deal. Most skulls, all human skulls that we know about, normal human skulls, are made up of 4 plates. The frontal plate, the 2 parietal plates on top of the skull, which wrap around to the sides, and the rear plate, which is called the occipital plate. All these plates have what are called sutures, and the sutures, they look like little stitch marks, and these sutures close as the child grows, okay? But they're still there. You can still see them. So you would see a frontal suture, a parietal suture, and an occipital suture. That's what you would see. The skulls that we saw down there, and we saw hundreds of them, many only had one parietal plate instead of two. There's not even a hint of a suture, a parietal suture, going from the frontal plate to the rear plate or the occipital plate. Not even a hint of it. Nothing. It's not there. Only one parietal plate. And that's what we saw, and that's the skull that I have in my possession. I'm looking at him. It's a cast of a skull that our friend Joe Taylor took. It's absolutely unbelievable what we're looking at here. And we saw skull after skull after skull after skull after skull. I've shown it so far to 2 medical doctors, both of which instantly point out the anomalies of the skull. I've shown it to an archaeologist who was totally baffled by what she was looking at. I've showed it to a forensic anthropologist, like I mentioned, who said, "Where did you get this skull?" He was stumped by it. He said, "Well, you think you're onto something here. Where did you get it?" He wanted to know immediately where I got the skull. I just told him Peru. And we're going back because there's so much more to see. There's so much more. You see, the Peruvian government isn't like rounding up all these artifacts and hiding them. Although, as I mentioned earlier, some are. The museum in Lima, which had the big 9-foot skulls, they're gone. The other museum in Lima, the National Museum, all the skulls that were elongated, they're gone. And the reason for that is it flies in the face of Darwinism. It opens up the possibility that there was another culture that predated Native Americans living in Paracas. They also had red hair. And this is something which is absolutely startling. We talk about this in Watcher 6, and I've been telling people on this over and over again. It's absolutely a phenomenal find that we discovered with the help of Steve Colburn, the scientist that Dr. Roger Lear and his group uses when they're dealing with alien implants and alien artifacts. By the way, we'll be back in the lab with him very shortly. But that's another story. So in Watcher 6, Richard, my partner, we've got hair samples that we were allowed to take from one of the red-haired mummies found in the Paracas region. And this hair sample, we say red. It's not flaming red. It's sort of a dark auburn, but it's not black, all right? And we put it into a machine which is called Raman spectroscopy. And this machine calculates and spits out on a graph the molecular structure of whatever it is you're studying. So we had 4 hair samples. We had a human hair, undyed control sample. We had another human hair that was dyed to see what that would look like. We had the Paracas red hair sample, and we had a blonde hair that allegedly came from a person who had been abducted and had been forced to have sex with a hybrid. And I realized by saying that, we're not in Kansas anymore. This hair was blonde, and the person had a presence of his mind when he awakened the following morning to take the hair and put it in a plastic baggie and give it to Steve Colburn later on. And that's what he did. So we analyzed all 4 hairs. This is all in Watchers 6. It's and the book and the DVD literally go hand in hand. Literally go hand in hand. So the human hair, it's on a graph. It starts, and you remember the graph, it looks like an L, okay? So on the left-hand side, here's the starting thing, and it comes in, let's say, and it makes a nice little arc. Nice little arc. There's the human hair. And then it's hard to do this over the phone. The dyed hair starts sort of in the same place where the red hair or the human hair was, but then goes straight up and off the charts. It just goes way off the charts. So the human hair and the dyed hair, because of the Raman spectroscopy, there's a huge difference between the two of them. Then we take the red-haired mummy and we put that in there, and we track that, and we track the blonde alien hair, and we about fell out of our chairs. They track every little dip, every little nuance. They track.
Wow.
Yeah, hello. And what that does for me, it's still inconclusive, folks. It's still inconclusive. But it's another step that what we are looking at in antiquity is exactly the same source as happening in modernity. The fallen one is tampering with the genome in antiquity, and he does so again in modernity, in the present
Daniel 2:43.
day.
Daniel 2:43. It's in the Bible.
There it is.
I don't understand how
their
anybody
seed
can
will
deny
mingle
it.
with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to him. And my friend and associate Jim Williamson was the man who really did the due diligence on that. The word cleave is the same cleave that we see back in Genesis 6, and it means marriage, just like the fallen angels are giving a marriage. No longer marriage in the Daniel passage. They will not marry them. They will not cleave to them, which is exactly what we see in the modern day alien abduction phenomena.
Yep. Amen. Kenneth?
Hey, L.A., a lot of your work reminds me and confirms or is, in commonality with Klaus Donna. I don't know if you've talked to him. But
I know Klaus. Yeah, we're looking at the same stuff.
It's very,
well, not
very
the same
encouraging.
stuff. Yeah, it's Klaus apparently has an area. I think it's down in Ecuador where he says he's got a 30-foot or 20-footer that he wants to unearth. Well, Klaus, I mean, I can help you fund that. Let's go. But you got to share the evidence. We'll all publish books at the same time, so there's no skullduggery. But the world needs to know about this. In fact, I need to write him a letter here and offer to do that. We need to go. We need to go. If it's there, we need to go. But listen, Kenneth, honestly, I will pay you for your time, my friend, whatever you want. Whatever your time's worth, I will pay you. Please go to the farm site. Please go to the museum, see what you can find for me. And if you find anything at all, you never know. You never know what you'll find. I will make arrangements to fly back.
Well, L.A., I'm going to dig into this within a 50-mile radius of where I live. There's another one up in Franklin. A Judge Attlee back in 1798. He saw a giant skeleton, 11 feet, 8 inches tall, in Franklin, Pennsylvania. It's in his journal. And now he's not a man of letters like in terms of science, but he's a judge. He's a judge. And
I think he can read a tape measure. What do you think?
Hey, I don't know about that, but within a 50-mile radius, I probably have 5 to 7 sightings here that have been documented like this. I'll dig into it, L.A. If I find anything, I'll be in touch with you.
Please do, Kenneth. Please do. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Oh, praise God. So, wow, this is exciting. So, when do you anticipate getting a shipment of these books, or do people place like early orders, or how do you? What do you do?
You can still buy it on my website, lamarzulli.net, lamarzulli.net. The moment we get them, we'll start shipping. We're supposed to get them Friday. That's what we're hearing. We're supposed to get a delivery on Friday. So once we get the delivery, we'll start shipping immediately.
Okay, so in the table of contents that you have displayed on your website, it mentions 2 different points. A theory and then a theory emerges later.
Right.
What is that theory? I mean, can you talk about that?
Well, we've got a few minutes. I guess I can.
Yeah, I don't want to take you too far into it, but just
well,
maybe
look, people need to understand this. I mean, I'm spilling the beans here. But when you get the book, you see it for yourself. You see the pictures. You see what we uncovered, and it's mind blowing, folks. I mean, look, there's no hype here. It's what we saw was mind blowing, and this book, I am sure, is going to be incredibly controversial once people start reading it, and the Darwinists get a hold of this thing, and the evolutionists get a hold of this thing, and the archaeologists get a hold of this thing. They're going to come after me. I know that. I already know that. Because it's like a monkey wrench into the whole Darwinian paradigm. We have been lied to. We have been lied to. These people are weasels. They have deliberately obfuscated evidence that would support a biblical paradigm because they are ardent evolutionists. That's what's at stake here. There is no God. We just evolved. Don't you understand that? Darwin, Darwin, Darwin. And they shove it down our throats. I'm tired of it. I'm not eating your pablum anymore, your nonsense anymore, because you hide the evidence, and you do it in antiquity, and you do it in the present day. Now, we believe that these ancient megalithic structures built thousands and thousands of years ago. And in the book, I differentiate pre-flood structures, post-flood structure. A pre-flood structure would be Baalbek, in my opinion, or Sacsayhuaman in Peru, pre-flood structure. Post-flood structure, Great Circle Mountain in Ohio. But these are part of a larger grid, especially the stuff in Sacsayhuaman. These megaliths are 120 tons plus. They are polygonal shapes, meaning they are many-sided shapes. Yet, the joinery is so fine that you cannot put a human hair between them. And when you go in and examine the stones, these cut marks that you see on the face extend all the way through the stone. They're not just dressing the face and the back is rebel. These cut marks go all the way through the stone. There is no mortar that cements these stones together. They have been there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The stones, quarried from 40 to 60 miles away, have piezoelectric properties, which means they can conduct electricity in a similar way like crystal radios. They can conduct electricity. They have been stacked together. They are not temples. They are part of a grid, in our opinion. And this grid was worldwide. It more than likely served as an energy source, as a communication device, and who knows what else. And what's interesting, the days of Noah, the implications of that verse may have far more reaching consequences than ever before. And what I mean by that, there is now a grid that has been established over the whole earth. Right now it's benign, right now. But at some point when the Antichrist comes back, he will use this grid to enslave every human being on this planet. And of course, I'm speaking of one, the World Wide Web, and the network of satellites that we have that circle the globe. It's back. It's different than what it was in the days of Noah, but the grid is back, just like it was in the days of Noah. Grid wasn't here 50 years ago, folks. Didn't exist. The grid did exist thousands of years ago in the days of Noah. Absolutely. We've got proof from all over the globe about that. Same thing with the Giza Pyramid. That's not a tomb. Giza Pyramid's not a tomb. And the piezoelectric properties of the limestone casings, which were cut with such precision, once again, a human hair cannot go through it. Going back to Sacsayhuaman, these polygonal shapes put together with no mortar, where each, and you've got to see the pictures to understand what I'm talking about. When you hold the book in your hand, you look at the pictures, you just go, oh my gosh, I had no idea this even existed. It does exist. And it's not built by the Inca. We are hard-pressed today to duplicate the technology. We don't know what the technology these ancients used to create these megalithic structures like we see in Sacsayhuaman. But my theory is simply this, that the angelic host used supernatural power to create the stonework that we see in Sacsayhuaman, in Cusco, in Ollantaytambo, and in other places, not only in Peru, but all over the globe. This is
Praise
fallen
God.
angel technology, or what I would
Praise
prefer to
Jesus.
call Nephilim technology.
Praise Jesus. You know what? I have to jump in at this point because I got to tell you, brother. You know what? What you're sharing right now has been something that I have said probably now for, 4 or 5 years in various articles I've written and on this radio show. I have quipped. I've made, quips about, people who hypothesize that a bunch of giants got together and grunted and pushed together and they shoved a 150-ton rock, but nobody can ever talk about how was the rock cut in the first place. We're dealing with incredible fallen angel technologies that are far and above. Why would you have what are they called, the Nazca lines and stuff that are showing animals and humans that can only be viewed from outer space by spacecraft? Why would you have clay cylinders in the ancient Sumerian land of Ur, that are Mesopotamian Valley, that was dug up and have spacecraft on them? There's a much more to this story than meets the eye, and praise Jesus that you're bringing this forward to people in a tangible way so they understand that it's not a bunch of giants all in a row grunting, moving these rocks around. These are technologies like the ones that are mentioned in our Bible in Genesis 11, where it says, now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them in regard to the Tower of Babel. That is a supernatural remark from our Heavenly Father. That's not talking about a bunch of rocks stacked up on top of each other. That's some kind of ancient technology. Anyway, praise Jesus. Kenneth, did you want to jump in?
Just a quick comment, L.A. That entire suppression is reminding me of what the Royal Society actually fomented 2 generations before Charles Darwin with Erasmus, his granddaddy, and they wanted to promote their doctrine of on becoming. So they had to get rid of this whole creation story, which was so well validated with the archaeological record. They had to do away with all of it. And at the very top of their secret society, I really believe they know about it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they know, and they're keeping it under the radar.